All right, everyone. Hello and welcome. This is the part two of the Illuminated Conversations podcast with Stephen McLean. If you didn't catch part one, go ahead and click the link above. Part one will show you kind of the setting the foundation of the conversation that you're about to watch. Who he is, how he came to be, some foundational of just what it'll make a lot more sense if you haven't seen part one to watch part one before watching part two. What you're about to watch in part two is just a building on of what we talked about in part one and how we have some more practical hands-on concepts to how we can have much more healthy, grounded, or at least resources, how we can navigate the next few years of the spiritual awakening that's happening, no matter where we are in that process, in the joy, the love, excitation, or in the existential depression, or somewhere in between, right? And so just giving you some sort of head-on context before you go into the wonderful picture show. So thank you all for watching. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, share the video. And also these conversations may be triggering. They may bring some stuff up for you, but my encouragement to you is to just really sit with them, have conversations with others, and be open as we share in these conversations. Be open to change, be open to having a new concept, a new premise in the world, and sometimes holding on to those old concepts is just really going to hold us back from evolving and progressing. So anyway, thank you for being on this. And now, without further ado, on with the show. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Illuminated Conversations podcast, part two with Steve Healing McLean. We had a wonderful conversation earlier, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, click the link below or above, whatever direction that is, and you'll get to see the a bow beloved. That's my lovely listexia that I have, by the way. And so This is perfect segue for this conversation of words, things, meanings, reprogramming what we have in the past, what it means in the present and the future, and how can we shift our realities around that, right? This is a great way to just start this conversation. And I'll start with a personal experience to give people some fodder for us to go into. You know, you could call it self-hypnosis, self-hypnotherapy, whatever, but about 12 years, 14 plus years ago, I experienced a few traumatic experiences on the job when working in construction, and developed PTSD from it. And what I did without knowing it is I sat in an easy chair outside and kind of went back into the scenario again and again and again and again, and kept replaying it to the point where it became desensitized in my own being, right? I would cry, I would emote, I would journal, I would do whatever. And every time I went deeper into it, I'd get different messages from my angels, from my guides, whatever, about why this trauma happened to me. But now I can go back into that state and I can watch the whole thing as I'm watching a movie on a TV screen going, oh yeah, that happened. And I'm completely neutral about it. And this is kind of what we talked about towards the end of the last podcast from last week, right? As the cat comes in to say, hello, Bryn. And Brinny is coming to say hello, because cats are wonderful transmuters of energy. So with that, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, is how can we take past traumas. And I will say that trauma, I had two of them back to back. One of them left me with PTSD from the sound of a fire engine, and another one left me traumatic in other ways, but it took almost a better part of 8 years for me to heal it, right? And not having that stimulus be traumatic to me anymore, right? And cats were definitely a very helpful part in me giving the cat mustache healing. So with that, Steve, let's keep this conversation rolling. And so that's a wonderful just starting point for all this, right?
Yeah. So keeping it rolling.
So let me just say this, maybe what came out of it for me, as we talked about dark night of the soul and things happening, we don't understand why, and the trauma of that, what those two occurrences, I was working in construction, they sort of spiritually and physically woke me up. And from that, I got into the healing arts realm, right? Because I now had physical experience of trauma and healing that I could take and offer my clients, right? What it's like to go through the trauma process, what it's like to go through the healing process, what it's like to experience trauma and be at the bottom of the barrel of depression and all these things, right? And so, you know, for me, that was my own personal journey of this is why it happened. And it doesn't always make sense in the process. It's always hindsight, go, oh, okay. this is why I was abused. This is why this happened. This is why whatever. And as I've heard so eloquently, it's not your fault something happens to you, but it's your responsibility to do something about it, right? To not be the victim, to be the take that energy, transmute it, move it forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. And if you're not allergic to them, you can get a cat,
yeah.
because the cats will teach you how to communicate on a whole nother level. I mean, they make sounds, meow, and all the various sounds they make, but basically they want your attention in a particular way. And if you're not giving them the attention in the way they want, they'll tend to act out in ways that help you to look at the attention you're giving them and whether or not it's the attention that they want. So they're really good at mind control, actually creating the reality that they would like to have through you. And so I would say that since this is Brinny, and she's popping her head up so you can see. This is Brinny, at least Brinny's ears. And Bryn showed up about 4 years ago, I think. And she rescued me from cat rescue. It's actually a human rescue facility where the cat rescues the human from the facility. And she's been by my side ever since, and she is really good. And I think almost all cats are really good at moving energy. And so she's moving the computer right now and marking it as hers. But she's been very helpful in grounding energy in healing sessions. So a lot of the work that I do in terms of healing sessions has to do with working with the field of relationship. So we all have a field of relationship with others. So you and I have a field of relationship, and we're really sovereign beings. So no one should enter our field of energetics. That's our place. And then where we share energy is in the field of relationship, which is the field between you and me. So I have a field, you have a field, and between us, we have this field of relationship. And so all the work that I do in what's called my healing work has to do with helping people ground disturbed energy or let go of disturbed energy in the field of relationship. So whatever the person wants to clear, they release into the field of relationship, and then I help them release that energy. So sometimes it involves them remembering the event that has this emotions stored to it. And so as that emotion comes up in the field of relationship and we let it go by grounding it, and in the course of the way I do the work, I ground it through my feet into the earth. And there's really not such a thing as disturbed energy per se. Energy wants to move. So energy that's being held is disturbing because we're holding it. Once we let it go, it's just energy.
And you touched on this in the last conversation, calling it disturbed energy, and this clarifies what you just said. So yeah.
Okay. And so as we ground this energy into the earth, we are not putting disturbed energy into the earth. We're just releasing energy into the earth that's just energy. It was only disturbed when we were holding on to it. So as soon as we stop holding on to it, it's just energy, and energy wants to flow. So if energy is stuck in our liver, it's not flowing. And there's a contraction, there's some energy holding that energy in our liver. And when we let go of that energy, things start to flow. And so there's all sorts of kind of effects of us doing this. So if we've held this energy in our liver for a period of time, then that has caused maybe a contraction, and the body's desire to not have that energy come into consciousness And so it's held in a place, and that energy can disturb the energetic of the cells and organs that it's in. So if it's held in the liver can get congested. The liver's function can be diminished. And so when we let that energy begin to move again, we might have, on occasion, we'll have these experiences where we'll feel a little bit flu-like symptoms, because when the liver is not functioning at its highest level, then some of the toxicity that the liver is meant to process just gets stored in the liver. So when that toxic substance begins to move, it can move into our system, and then we can feel like, oh, I don't feel as good. And so I've just had many experiences of a particular process called the Master Cleanse Diet. And so you can find a little booklet on it, and it has to do with lemon juice and water and cayenne pepper and maple syrup. But anyway, it tends to flush the body. And it says in the pamphlet, like about the fourth day, you'll have a release that will make you feel not so good for about 6 hours. And then, so you can't do much. You're lying there, just not feeling good. And then for about 6 hours, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, it clears. And all of a sudden you'll have all this energy. So I've done this, fast. I don't find it easy to do fast, but I find it easy to do this Master Cleanse diet because it keeps my blood sugar real stable, and it's just cleansing over a period of however long you do it for. And I think the longest I did it was 20 days at one point, which
and
was
you can still be eating food and all that, right? Just
no.
Oh,
no. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but in the Master Cleanse diet, no, you're not eating. You're just drinking lemon, grade B maple syrup, mixed with water. And I don't put cayenne in it because I don't like the taste of it. So I take cayenne capsules. And the idea of the cayenne is it breaks stuff up and helps you to discharge it better. So
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I tend to just do it as in a capsule, as opposed to put it in the lemonade and have that cayenne taste. And cayenne varies in terms of its intensity. So if you get a really intense cayenne and you put it in your lemonade, you're like, I can't drink this.
Well, I was wondering, oh, sorry, I'm interrupting, but I was wondering because I figured just the yogis being intense, like, oh, because there was a lot of these like Sikh Kundalini yogis are all about intense energy. And I always heard about the Master Cleanse through that sort of track of Kundalini yoga. And so I thought the cayenne was a part of that, but thank you for explaining that the cayenne helps.
It breaks up the mucus. Yeah, it breaks up the mucus, and it just makes it easier for the body to eliminate whatever toxins that are going to come out through the Master Cleanse diet. And I feel like this is a time of cleansing, and it's cleansing on all levels. So physical, mental, emotional, spiritual cleansing is going on. We're in the spiritual cleansing phase. So if people have been finding over the past few years their dream world has been more intense than in the past, it's because oftentimes they're doing this spiritual cleansing at night while they're sleeping. And so it's a good time to do it. Sometimes it can be disruptive of the sleep. And so a person doesn't feel like they've slept as well. Maybe they've been working some issues out in the dream world. And so they don't feel as rested. But because of the kind of amount of fear that's been in the field, people are a little bit more in fight or flight just throughout their days. And even if they were somewhat, panicky, tendency towards panic and anxiety prior to 2020, after 2020, it was fired off big time. So a lot of people, and I think there was some intentionality behind this, because people are much more willing to do what can be thought to be not intelligent things when they're in a lot of fear. When a person's in the present moment and not in fear, they'll tend to investigate things a little more thoroughly. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. But when they're in fear, they're like, I'll try anything. And that's not a really good model for living a high quality life, is I'll try anything. Yeah. But anyway, people are having various experiences, and good for us to stay in our hearts and stay in compassion and curiosity.
And I've quoted you in the past podcasts and saying that being fully present, you can only be in love and curiosity. I think there's another word that you present, curiosity, love, right?
Compassion
Compassion
and curiosity, I think. And again, that concept came out of neuro-linguistic programming. And so people can go Google that if they want to know more about neuro-linguistic programming. But there's in NLP, it's thought that we have 3 states of being. So one state of being is experiencing the world from a place of self. So it's just me, Steve, experiencing the world from my state. So that's experiencing it from self. And then there's experiencing the world from other. And so we can experience the world from other, where we can look at their facial expressions and kind of get a sense that, oh, maybe their gut's tight, or their shoulders are tight, or their expression is of irritation or sadness, or they're really afraid. And that's experiencing the world as other. That doesn't mean you become the other to experience the world. It means you have a sense of how that other is experiencing the world. So you can experience the world as self, as other, or as an observer. The observer experience is not experiencing the world as self or other, but is experiencing the world as outside the world, experiencing the world like it's a movie. And the pure state of observer is compassion and curiosity. So that's where that comes from. Yeah. And I think, the other words, love and whatever kind, thoughtful words we put on things, those are good states to experience the world. But as an observer, it's compassion and curiosity. Compassion. So the states that keep you out of the energetics of the situation, but you're aware of the energetics of the situation. So right. You can be aware of the energetics of other by just kind of feeling what they feel like. You can be the awareness of the energetics of self by feeling what it feels like. Observer, you're outside of it.
So let's take that and go into what we sort of talking about at the end of the last show of, for all intents and purposes, you said something really clever last night, is my new constructs are deconstructing my old constructs, right?
Yeah.
And just wrap your head around that one, everyone, for just a minute. But the idea is, Landmark says nothing means anything, and we only move forward with our own history, and we create our own history based on our past, sort of thing, through the conventions that we've been taught. The words that we speak, this is blue. Why? Because we've all collectively decided this is blue, that's the sky, this is the road, right? We've all collectively decided this. And so what we were discussing last night and leading into this conversation is how can we maybe move forward with a belief, and I'll share this is the thought. We laughingly said, well, it's attributed to Buddha, but I've learned it, integrated, and I believe it now, which is what we're talking about. I don't say this because Buddha said it, I said it because I believe this, is don't believe the old wise sage, don't believe the village elder, don't believe all your councilmen and whatever, have your own experiences, and from that, whatever makes sense, go forward with that. And know that you can always change your mind on whatever's going on. You're not locked in any particular story or situation, right? So as things happen, as new evidence is provided, new data is provided, go, how do I actually feel like this? It challenges my old belief, but actually feels better. So I'll sit with that. And as you said before, have experiences. And if they render positive results, maybe that's something I can consider moving forward with, even
Yeah.
though it may be counter to my past, right?
Right. Right. And maybe not even necessarily counter to my past, but just a very different experience than my past. And I think, it's interesting just looking at some terms, such as I believe this now, looking at the term belief having to do with the story based on unresolved experiences. Now, you don't have to look at it that way, but if you are looking at, and I've tended to look at it for the past 3 years as beliefs being my story based on emotions. Then you talked a little bit about, so I believe that now, which means that you're still believing it, which is separate than your experience. Now, when you begin to trust your experience, then you're basically coming from yourself. You're coming from your experience. Now, unresolved experiences are traumas and the stories made up from the trauma. So as long as we have these emotional components attached to our belief, then we're not seeing the moment clearly. We're seeing it out of the past, as you talked about, and way back in those mountains behind you. Yeah. So it's good to just kind of work with these terms, because these terms, what love means to one person, what it means to another, may be very, very different things. So I love you, and I want you to be this way so I can continue to love you. And it's like, well, that sounds a little bit more like manipulation than love. And there's constructs around love. So we have these constructs, and there's constructs, and you talked about the constructs, and we're all somewhat basing our experience on our constructs. And part of those constructs, some of those constructs are useful, and some of those constructs aren't so useful. They're just self-limiting. So you started off by talking about the conversation we had about this construct we're moving into, deconstructing our construct. So that needs to happen. If you have this little tiny house, taking up a whole lot of property in Seattle, which was actually what was happening. There were these 4 little houses taking up kind of this block, back when there weren't that many houses and they're built on larger pieces of property. So a company came in and bought up all the houses so they could have the property. And then they had people buy the houses and move them to a different location. So they actually sold the houses that were there to people, and there were companies that would come in and lift the house up and haul it off.
Oh, they didn't destroy it. They just moved the house.
Yeah, they just moved the house. And then they built a high-rise on that piece of property that had 4 little houses, now had a place for 20, 30, 40 people to live or more.
Capitalism. I will say, when I worked in construction in Seattle, what I did wasn't too dissimilar. They'd buy a single family house, they'd knock it down, and in that place put up basically 4 units, two dwelling units. So now there's 4 single family units on which there used to be 1. So my early days of construction, I was part of that, and I'm like, this isn't cool, man. Like, it's population density.
Well, it was cool for those 3 families, or those 4 families. It was cool that they had a place to live, because it's always cool to have a place to live. It's just nice.
But I like living out on the road, Steve. Come on.
So you had a place to live. It was on the road.
Right.
So to me, having shelter, it's very useful, especially like, you have a scene that looks like it could be the Southwest, who knows where it is? You might know where it is, but it looks kind of like the Southwest. blue sky, you feel really warm in the video, and yet you're in Michigan. And I don't know how much snow you've had lately, but if you had that background, everybody'd be feeling a little chillier. But because they're looking at you in a t-shirt with this background of the desert, they're like, oh, how nice, how warm. And that's just taking a visual construct and creating a reality in our physical body from it, which is just an interesting thing. So that model of removing these 4 houses and putting up the structure where 20, 30 families can live, however many, they needed to do that because they had limited space in Seattle. So they needed to do this. So they did it. We've been living in a world that in many ways has been constructed for us. So who we want to talk about is doing that construction, who's making up these realities that we've been living in. We kind of incarnated into these realities of our family of origin. They might have had a particular religion. They might have had a particular ethnic background. They might have come from some part of the world where they felt connected to that part of the world that they brought. They moved into neighborhoods where more of the people from that part of the world lived. There was all these different ethnic groups, all these different religious groups, and there was all this kind of holding on to these constructs. So Little Italy or Chinatown, or they all wanted those constructs that they came from. And we want the constructs that we came from when the constructs help us to feel safe. As I've said many times, the bottom line for people is safety. So when does healing take place? It takes place in a place where a person feels safe because they're releasing an experience of not feeling safe. So it's best they can release that experience in an unsafe place, but more than likely they're going to release it less traumatically in a safe place. So I'd say, one of my construct is we're all looking for safety, and we're all looking for a safe community. So maybe in the past that had to do with our religion or our ethnicity or the country we came from or whatever. We would feel safer if we had those more similar to us living around us with similar constructs in terms of what's okay to do, not stealing your neighbor's bike, whatever, like we had these kind of rules. And so we grew up in these constructs. We grew up with these rules. And maybe for some of us, they worked, maybe some of them didn't work. And then we went into exploration. We went into how can the world be different for me? I live within these constructs. I don't necessarily appreciate them or want to live with them. How can I make changes that allow me to step outside of those constructs? So there's always of letting go of the safety of the construct. Even if we don't like it, we hold on to it because it feels safe. But when we want to move into a larger construct, we think that this might be a good idea. So we move into this larger construct. We have to let go of the smallest construct. So in order to build the 20-unit structure, we have to let go of the 4-unit structure.
Right.
And so whether or not that's good or bad, that's a whole nother thing. But in this process of expansion, it's mainly about letting go of the construct we've lived in.
So how about a practical version of that is, people who have, there's a saying that I heard is he's afraid to know what he would do if he was well. People who are in illness, whatever it may be, addiction, alcoholism, insert the blank, depression. At a certain point, it becomes comfortable and known, even though it is uncomfortable by nature. And if the person is given a path to healing, which takes them out of that addiction, out of that depression, out of the illness, now all of a sudden they know cognitively that it's healthier out there, but it's unknown because they've never been there before or haven't been there in a long time. So there's a wall of fear that's keeping them from coming from this place of comfortableness. Even though it's uncomfortable, it's known and it's safe, right?
Right.
Because they know how to
No,
operate
and
within this. It feels safe, even though whatever. So for them to step outside of that safety and go drop the addiction, drop the habit, or heal, right? It doesn't feel safe because it's new, and now I have to learn a new way of operating, a new modus operandi, a new community, new whatever, and I've heard it say, people who get into AA are great because they stepped up from being an addict, but now if they want to progress beyond AA, they need to leave that whole community behind in order to form a new community. So sometimes people will get stuck in those support groups, right? So this is another way it shows up practically, right? And not, again, are these right or wrong? No, these are just experiences, as you're saying.
Yeah. So if one were to imagine, and this may actually be what's going on, and everybody has a different idea or a different construct in terms of what's going on, and one of those may be that just because many people are talking about it does not mean it's true. So one possible construct is that the construction, and so people talk about people. Oftentimes these constructions of thought are manufactured. So a good example, because we've all just been through it, is the construction of thought of a pandemic. Oh, we have this virus. Oh, it's going to kill all these people. All these people, you have to stay indoors. You have to stay 6 feet away from each other. And you have to wear masks, whatever. And that construction came on really fast. And all of a sudden, people were living that. And now it's 3 years later, and people are still living that. So that's the idea of a construct or a matrix or a thought form. So we've all been living in various thought forms. We talked about them being involved in religion, ethnicity, country of origin, and all those different things are constructs that were accepted ways of behavior within different groups. So with what appears to be happening in the world right now is a breakdown of the construct or the matrix or the thought form. So what can we do on a personal level to have our life be somewhat functional while the entire construct is breaking down? And so that may be this last little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this is a great way to just give people something to chew on, And there was a quote that came to me, and I love my quotes that I come across, and actually like April of 2020, which was, "You can't stop the wave, but you can learn how to surf."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Change is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Different versions of the same idea here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And these platitudes, as we sort of like jokingly call them, but regardless, this world is going to be constantly evolving and shifting and changing. And if I clutch to and this is me, if I clutch to my old man ideals of how it's supposed to be, because it's always been that way, and that's what daddy always did, then it's going to just create suffering to me, right? Let go or be dragged is another version I've heard of this idea. So, is it always true? No, I think there are certain morals and values and ethics that we need to hold on to because they are getting dissolved and undermined. And that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. That was good.
But
just that little bit.
But inside of all that, it's just how can we consciously show up when new data shows up, look at it and go, like I'm encouraging people in this podcast to do, how does this actually feel? Does it feel supported? Does it feel challenging? Does it bring things up for me? What does it look like? Right. And I think we're speaking in vagueness and generalities, but we're touching on a bigger scope of what's going on.
And people who are watching this, those kind of a little bit of vagueness and generalities allows them to fill in the blank for themselves. So there's the thought that nothing inherently has meaning. Meaning is something we give to something.
Right.
So somebody's feeling a lot of grief over the loss of their grandmother. You're feeling no loss over the loss of their grandmother. You have no meaning associated with their grandmother. They have a lot of meaning associated with their grandmother. So the things that have meaning to us are the things that we've given meaning to. And maybe we've given meaning to some things that are not necessarily useful to give meaning to, but there are some things that are maybe useful to give meaning to that are being broken down by society with what may be referred to as woke consciousness. And so there's these various things that can be going on. So the structure is changing. So the bigger structure, the world structure is changing. So what can we do as an individual to work with that ourselves as it happens? So the breakdown, the change, the shift of the structure, how do we function within that as we shift and change? Because as the energy changes, we change.
Right.
So one little piece of hope that I feel like I can give to people is my understanding is that this process goes through till March 23rd of 2025. So we really literally just have about 2 more years of this spiritual cleansing. So you've already made it through 5. So you made it through 5 years of spiritual cleansing. There's only 2 more to go. So you're almost there. So that's the hopeful part. Now, is it going to get harder or easier? Last 5 years seemed like they were fairly difficult for most people, myself included, and others that I know, who are people who like to change and like to wake up and like to have things be different and are working towards things being different. They've still found this a very difficult time because when the energies are shifting quickly and we're shifting quickly, it's like riding that wave. Like, yeah, you catch the wave in just the right spot and you don't get crushed by it. you catch it in the wrong spot and blah, 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 you're in a washing machine. So, learning to do that is very helpful to everyone who's doing that. And everyone's doing that. And we can get hints and suggestions from others and try them out and find out if they work for us. Because it's not useful to believe more things people say, because you're just adding on another story to your story. So what's your experience? And I would just go back and say, if you just take one thing, and I think it was maybe from the earlier video that we did, if you just take one thing, is you can allow your emotions to separate from your story. You can imagine in your mind putting the story in your right hand and the emotion in your left. And by separating them, it's like separating the 2 kids that are fighting. You put them in the room, they work their stuff out. The emotions can release, then you've just got a story. Is it still a useful story without the emotions? Maybe not. But this to me is the greatest way that we can go through this next 2 years, because I'm going to just suggest it's going to be 2 years of change. I don't see there any way around it. Things are going to be changing rapidly. Take care of yourself, be compassionate towards yourself, be kind and loving towards yourself, and be very curious in each moment in terms of what you might be able to do to assist yourself to change to a world that's changing. But do it in a very intelligent way. And if you do it out of fear, if you do it out of anger, you do it out of grief, it will disrupt your ability to be present. So if you can learn to let go of the anger when it comes up Let go of the grief when it comes up. Let go of the fear when it comes up. Just separate them from the story and release the emotions. It doesn't mean you won't ever have emotions. It just means you won't be having old emotions repeating again and again and again.
And I'll say something that you said to me a few weeks ago that snapped me out of a pretty dark place was, if I'm doing the work with the attachment of a certain outcome that's in my favor, it's still a form of manipulation.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm glad you reminded me of it.
And-
A lot of these things, there's a frequency, and you can believe it or not believe it. It just doesn't make any difference. But from my experience, there is a frequency. The world has a frequency. The higher realms have a frequency. As my attention is on higher levels of consciousness, I tend to open up to higher levels of consciousness. If my attention is on how horrible the things are in the world, and I'm watching the television and seeing the horrible things, my attention's on that. And that's what I'm vibrating to.
Yep.
So one thing is, we can just let that stuff go and vibrate to a higher realm, vibrate in a higher frequency. And those will include compassion and love and curiosity and loving kindness. All those terms can be real experiences, but not from here. Because from here, they're just ideas. Like, oh, be more loving kindness. Okay, I'm loving you, I'm loving you, I'm loving you. Or it's like from here, like, oh, I am loving you. I don't even know how that happened.
Right. I mean, it's the, okay, love you, bye, versus, hey, I love you, right? Completely same words, completely different intention. So, well, thank you so much, Steve. I know you and I kind of ramble on for hours and hours, but thank you for this. And I'm sure there'll be more in the future, but thank you so much for this. Thank you for all your wisdom that you've shared.
And thanks for doing this, because I feel like this is this can be so useful for so many people, to hear two people who are navigating these waves, and maybe one has a more experience surfing than another, or the other person says, why stand up on the board when you can lie down on it? There's all sorts of options. You didn't even know you could surf lying down. and you've got a less of a distance to fall. And I went from being a surfer, in my teens, to being a belly boarder. And people say, well, why did you switch from surfing to belly board? I said, because I'd rather be in the wave than the board. And when you're a belly boarder, you're in the wave.
Nice.
And so maybe that's the last thing, is like, maybe just quit being a surfer and be a belly boarder.
There it is.
Just engage, be in the process, rather than trying to stand above it, or do both. Switch it back and forth.
Beautiful words of wisdom. I love that, Steve. Thank you so much.
Words of wisdom.
Or whatever, qualify everyone.
Oh, it's great.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you for being on this lovely journey with us. And please, as always, leave any comments below. And as Steve says, what do we have to do, Steve?
Like and subscribe. I've never done it myself, even once, but I might, but it would be kind of tacky if I liked and subscribed to the video I'm in, and that's the only one I've ever liked and subscribed.
All right. Well, if anything, let our levity bring up some high vibrations for you in your world, and as you go forward. And as I know, share the video as well. Don't forget to do that with anyone that you may think be interested. So I love all of you. Be all well and enjoy this beautiful, blessed day. Till next time. We'll see you in the next one, guys. See ya.
Namaste.